Two historic shipwrecks, separated by 5 decades and hundreds of kilometers apart, tell the tale of man's newfound ability to strike at his enemies from beneath the sea. Join the sea hunters as they search for the remains of 2 vessels that introduced submarine warfare to the world. Germany's U21, which drew first blood in the early days of the First World War, and the innovative underwater fighting ship lost by the Confederate Navy during the American Civil War, the H.L. Hunley. With over 100 million books in print, Clive Cussler is the Grand Master of shipwreck tales and adventure. Director of the Vancouver Maritime Museum, James Delgado is one of the world's foremost marine archaeologists. With over 20 years wreck diving experience, Mike Fletcher is an internationally renowned professional diver. Leading the Econova dive team, John Davis has coordinated shipwreck searches around the globe. Together, they explore the planet's last frontier in search of true adventures, the famous shipwrecks. They are the Sea Hunters.
Searching for shipwrecks can be a time-consuming venture. The search can last for a day or for a lifetime. Wrecks can be found hiding in the middle of an ocean, in a harbor, or even under the pavement of a parking lot. The uncovering of a long-lost wreck represents the end of a hunt and the beginning of a story. 2 shipwrecks that especially intrigue me provide an insight into the development of modern navies. The actions of these 2 vessels changed the very face of naval warfare forever. They were the first 2 submarines in history to sink an enemy warship. Now join us as we search and find these famous ships, World War I's first underwater killer, U21, and her predecessor, the American Civil War Confederate submarine, Hunley.
In this uncertain age, the notion of sleek black vessels silently prowling beneath the sea holds tremendous psychological power. Today, these deadly vessels can hurl missiles from the ocean's depths and strike at targets at nearly any point on the globe. Given their stealth and maneuverability, they represent one of the ultimate weapons in naval warfare. Today, the evolution of man's ability to strike from beneath the waves is moving toward its full potential. The 2 vessels that started us on this evolutionary path were the first underwater warriors, the first of their kind to sink enemy ships in battle. They were Germany's U21, a gray wolf which drew first blood during the opening days of the First World War, and the extraordinary underwater fighting ship wielded and lost by the Confederacy during the American Civil War, the legendary H.L. Hunley. These 2 vessels mark important turning points in the evolution of the modern submarine, and both have gone down in history as the vessels that got the first kill. Sea hunters James Delgado, Clive Cussler, and Mike Fletcher gather to discuss the exploration of these 2 landmark vessels, the H.L. Hunley and the German U-boat U21. In June of 1984, Clive Cussler launched an expedition to find U21. War records indicated that it was lost somewhere near the center of the North Sea. Clive finally pinpointed the wreck, but the finding of it wasn't easy.
We'd gone through the Navy, archives at Greenwich, and there was about 6 different locations from the Danish fishermen, the German fishermen, the Dutch fishermen, all of them. So when we went, I know we spent about a day and a half, 2 days, and we finally got a target, which looks like the submarine.
Although Clive identified a target, it was never dove upon. Now, 17 years later, the sea hunters will return to dive and confirm that this target is indeed U21.
So we're going to need a side scan. And
yeah, the side scan record will be good, but really getting down there. I can't join you on that stage of the survey, so the best video you can get of all the diagnostic features, I mean, it may be very obvious. There could be some serious trawl damage. Who knows what's going to be down there.
The team will voyage to the waters of the North Sea, which separates the island fortress of Great Britain from continental Europe. Somewhere, beneath the gray-green waves, lies one of the most celebrated and feared U-boats of the First World War, U21. At the Humberside port in Grimsby in northeastern England, the team board the research vessel SV Explorer. They have enlisted John Mayo Evans to lend them a hand in the search. The Sea Hunters team, along with the British crew, will set out to explore coordinates gathered by the earlier expedition led by Clive Cussler. It will be approximately a 20-hour trip to the position Clive charted, where they hope to confirm that the target is indeed the U-21. The invention of the self-propelled torpedo in the 1860s and the advent of the internal combustion engine were two of the most important advances in the evolution of the naval submarine. By the turn of the 20th century, the major navies of the world were developing fleets of this untried new weapon. Initially, the German Navy lagged behind the rest. As a result, Germany's first undersea boat, or U-boat, was not completed until December 1906, several years after Britain and the US had established their fleets. When the shot that killed Archduke Ferdinand launched the world into the First World War, the German Navy had only 20 U-boats ready for combat, against Britain's 74. 2 days into the war, 10 U-boats left the port of Heligoland to set off for the first submarine patrol of the war. On September the 5th, 1914, just off the coast of Scotland, the tall, lean commander of U-21 had just ordered his boat to the surface in order to recharge his batteries, when the first sighting of the British Pathfinder occurred. After a futile chase, Captain Otto Hersing stood on the deck of his conning tower, breathing in the fresh salt air, when the lookout alerted him to smoke on the horizon. The Pathfinder had reappeared. Hersing immediately ordered his crew to battle stations, and in minutes, U-21 slipped beneath the waves. Through the periscope, the funnels of the British cruiser, the HMS Pathfinder, could be seen, with the tossing waves hiding her periscope from the approaching cruiser. Hersing calmly stalked his prey, losing sight of her, then finding her once more. He carefully positioned the U-21 until just 1,600 yards, or 1.4 kilometers, separated her and the unwitting British vessel. Then he barked the order, "Fire!" A single torpedo leaped from the bow and streaked towards Pathfinder, its telltale white streak masked by the heavy swells. Then suddenly, the U-21 was rocked by a tremendous concussion. Crew members were knocked off their feet, and the lights inside the submarine boat flickered. Hersing raised his periscope and was awestruck at the destruction he had wrought. The torpedo had struck Pathfinder just behind the bridge, blowing a gaping hole in her hull. Her bow blown away, the Pathfinder upended, her stern lifting straight into the air. Then, like a bayonet, gradually slicing the water, she dropped beneath the waves within 4 minutes. It was on that day the U-21 became the first German U-boat to sink an enemy ship in the First World War.
These are literally directly from Clive Cussler's notes from June of 1984.
Our mission here was to get out and get film footage of U-21 at its final resting site. Now, Clive Cussler had, in 1984, with his NUMA team, gone out and side-scanned this site and had given us latitude and longitude coordinates, and those were the coordinates that we were going to use to go out and go directly to the site. We had a very short time frame to work in, so we were glad to be able to really head directly to the site. When we arrived, we immediately put the side-scan sonar in the water and began a search pattern.
The side-scan sonar towfish will be pulled behind the ship using sound waves to sweep the ocean floor and provide a picture of the seabed.
After towing the side-scan sonar for several hours, we came up with a problem. We could not find the wreck. We had searched the general area around the target site and no wreck was to be found. We decided at that point that we better just start consulting our charts and see if any of the charts had anomalies that were marked so that we could go directly point by point. What we decided to do was go directly after this target, which was about 3 miles north.
U21's sinking of HMS Pathfinder was a historic first, but the destruction of naval shipping was a secondary role for Germany's U-boats. Over a month later, U21 spotted a freighter steaming through the mist off the French coast. Hersing surfaced and ordered his deck gun crew to lob a shot across her bow. The ship came to. Hersing brought U21 alongside and ordered the ship's captain to present his papers. The manifest showed the ship was hauling supplies from England to France, a lawful prize of war. Hersing ordered the crew into their lifeboats and sank the ship with a couple of well-placed shells from his deck gun. The ship rolled over on her side and sank. On land, the conflict had waned into a stalemate of trench warfare. There would be no quick victory there. So, in February of 1915, Germany began a campaign of destruction against commercial shipping sailing in and out of Great Britain. Fiendishly, the U-boats prowled the waters of the North Sea off the east coast of Great Britain. Britain's shipping sailed confidently in and out of the great seaport of Liverpool with impunity, confident that no U-boats had the range to threaten the English west coast. Otto Hersing on U21 soon dispelled that myth. After carefully navigating through minefields directly under the noses of British destroyers, Hersing announced the presence of German submarines off Liverpool by audaciously shelling a British airfield. A short while later, Hersing sent 3 freighters to the bottom of the Irish Sea. U21 had announced to the world that Germany's U-boats were ghosts. They could appear and disappear, at will. The side-scan sonar has turned up a target. It appears to be long, smooth, and cylindrical. Could it be the submarine?
Conning tower, and then the deck gun mounts, or perhaps the deck gun itself. It's very probable the deck gun could still be there.
While the Explorer is an excellent survey vessel, she's far too large a ship to dive from when she's not at anchor. So we transfer to the ship's inflatable, which for live boat diving is far safer and more practical. I followed the shot line down that had been dropped on the target from the Explorer, and that line couldn't have landed in a more difficult spot. It had skipped off the target and dropped into a deep depression. Following the line down, it led about 20 feet or 6 meters below the seabed into a trench that had been created by an overturned shipwreck. I found myself in a dark mud hole in 180 feet or 54 meters of water surrounded by fish net. The only way to identify this site was to look under the overturned shipwreck at her deck, which was now pressed into the mud. The exposed hull of the vessel turned upside down explained the cylindrical shape we had seen on the sonar image. But where the hull met the overturned deck was not what you would expect from a submarine. My mind was filled with doubt. I was beginning to believe that this was not U21.
While Great Britain increased their efforts and alertness, Otto Hersing received orders to do the unthinkable, to sail alone through the British waters of Gibraltar and into the Mediterranean. Here they would support Germany's Turkish allies in the Gallipoli campaign. The cruise would require pinpoint timing and was nearly aborted when it was discovered that the diesel oil provided during an at-sea refueling was unusable. Hersing, ever bold and daring, elected to continue, rationing his fuel supply by submerging only when absolutely necessary. He brazenly sailed above water through the Straits of Gibraltar, submerging only twice when spotted by British patrol boats. Refueling at an Austrian port, U21 proceeded to Gallipoli. It was there that she torpedoed the British battleship HMS Triumph at point-blank range, and then escaped the escorting destroyers by diving beneath her sinking victim. Some days later, Hersing sank another British battleship. In response, the British withdrew their capital ships from the critical battle and headed for the island of Mudros. With just 2 torpedoes and 1 small submarine, Otto Hersing had robbed the Allied troops on shore of the tremendous firepower of the British Navy. Hersing's actions not only buoyed the morale of the besieged Turkish troops in Gallipoli, he became an idol at home in Germany. While the U-boat commanders were reviled as pirates in England, in Germany, they were national heroes. Hersing's picture graced popular magazines and souvenir postcards. Songs and poems were composed in his honor. Back aboard the Explorer, Mike gives the disappointing news. The wreck is that of a surface vessel, not a U-boat.
An old steel freighter. It's encouraging at first. Of course, I took the downline.
When Mike resurfaced and gave his report on the actual wreck site, we were all quite discouraged. What had really looked like a submarine on the side-scan sonar turned out to be a collier, a freighter that was turned upside down, and the image the side scan was giving us was, of course, just the smooth shape of the hull. At that point, we knew we had a real problem. We only had 4.5 days of search time left, and we had to get immediately to work, not on a film trip, but on a search trip. And we set up a 4 square mile box, immediately put the side scan back in the water and started to work that grid, and at the same time, got ourselves back onto the satellite phone and began to call everyone who we felt might have some information about shipwreck sites or point anomalies in that area. As it turned out, we were very lucky. We had a contact in France who had a 1988 chart that was made by the government of the Netherlands, who had done a survey through that area. And on that chart, we had 5 or 6 point anomalies that looked like shipwrecks that encircled the area of the NUMA coordinates.
The team decided to travel to the closest known target, just northeast of their current position.
After traveling the 7 miles to the first target area, we all gathered directly at the side scan screen. We knew that the fish was just about to go over the site, and we all were very anxious to see the image. As the image appeared on the screen, we saw immediately that we had another long cylindrical shape, but this particular target had an additional attribute, and that was an area that really looked as if it could be the conning tower of a submarine. So Mike and I and Captain Gary Goodyear talked for a while and decided this really was a good target. And even though we'd been fooled on the first one, this looked good enough to put divers in the water. And we immediately requested that Mike just get down and get dressed, and we'd go directly after this site.
America's entry into the war, April 6, 1917, and the introduction of the convoy system spelled the end of the U-boat fleet. Suddenly, American destroyers were accompanying the convoys. Germany was tired after 4 years of war, and the sailors on the surface fleet showed unease. Unlike the mutinous sailors of Germany's surface fleet, the brave U-boat crews fought until the very end. The armistice signed on November 11, 1918, called for the surrender by Germany of all her hated U-boats. On November 20th, a sad procession of 20 U-boats made their way to Harwich, England, where they would be turned over to the British Navy. The humiliation of the event was too much for one of these men to bear. Otto Hersing found himself wishing he had not lived to see this day. That he and the U-21 had survived the war was a tribute to his shrewd abilities and his tremendous good luck. The war had claimed 178 German submarines destroyed in battle. The U-boats had sent over 11 million tons, or approximately 9,900 kilotons of Allied shipping, to the bottom. On the voyage to Harwich from the German port of Kiel, Hersing suddenly reported that the submarine had sprung a leak. The British knew full well that Hersing had scuttled the submarine, but could do nothing except watch her go down and gather up the survivors. Otto Hersing had chosen to send his gallant ship to the bottom rather than turn her over to the enemy. Hersing remained in the German Navy until 1924. He remained a hero of the defeated nation, one of the Navy's most decorated officers, and an inspiration when Germany rebuilt her U-boat fleet just 15 years later.
Clive had warned me about the North Sea, so I thought I was prepared for just about anything. I could deal with the currents, and I could accept what turned out to be really poor visibility. But the one thing I hadn't counted on were the jellyfish. And even the downline that we descended on were covered in their broken off tentacles. By the time I reached the bottom, my face was burning with what felt like the stings of a dozen bumblebees. But then I saw what I knew was a submarine conning tower, and my thoughts went right back to U21. It was easy to get beyond the jellyfish and just to marvel at those unmistakable twin periscopes pointing straight up at the surface, 152 feet or 46 meters overhead. Knowing I didn't have a lot of time, I turned quickly and headed to what I thought would be the bow. I remembered Jim's words to come back with as much detailed information as I could, and I knew that hatch placement and type was something that would go a long way in helping identify this vessel. My heart sank when I realized that the bow was completely torn off this submarine. But then I spotted the capstan, and I knew if the capstan was here, then there was a good chance that the forward diving planes were still in place. And sure enough, there was what remained of the horizontal rudders that helped guide these subs to either dive or ascend. There was no mistake. The shaft was there, and the broken body of the port diving plane. Moving back to the conning tower, I got a look at the access hatch on what would be the top of the tower, and a second good look at those beautiful periscopes. Traveling back towards the stern, I came across an open oval hatch. I knew this had to be the aft torpedo bay for loading torpedoes. That's why they have this odd shape. I couldn't resist a peek down inside. I didn't hold out too much hope for the stern. I assumed, like the bow, it would be badly broken up, and generally it was, but if you could look beyond the destruction, there were the two torpedo tubes, the port side still closed, and the starboard side open to the sea. Jim had foreshadowed a U-21 ravaged by over 80 years of pounding by the ground gear of deep-sea trawlers. But I wasn't prepared to find a ship almost ripped beyond recognition. There was a reason why she had waited so long for Clive Cussler. Nothing about getting to this place or diving here had been easy. And I can't remember ever leaving bottom with such a heavy heart, wishing that I had more time to gather information. Still, the video that we were able to present to Jim Delgado was enough. He was able to do his analysis and to say that in all likelihood, we had indeed found U-21.
Despite a swollen and burning face from jellyfish stings, the cruise back from the dive site is considerably more upbeat.
The visibility was considerably better than the first dive on the old freighter. And yeah, it's largely intact. It's not unlike L-26, although all the sail, conning tower, the periscopes are both up and in place. I'd say standing close to 5-6 meters at least above the rest of the conning tower, with net hanging off of it.
Yeah.
It's really something to see.
Discovering U-21 was an exciting moment for the team, for Clive, for myself, and particularly for Mike and John, who were there, who saw her and brought the video back. The early German submarines of World War I are little appreciated or understood by many. Having the opportunity to examine U-21 gives us a very tangible means of assessing this first generation of deadly warriors of the sea. U-21 was a significant submarine to find. She was the first submarine to kill in World War I. But she wasn't the first submarine to kill in history. That submarine was H.L. Hunley, a ship born at a time when America was defining itself, a ship born in the heart of the American Civil War.
When the war began in April 1861, the Confederate Navy was utterly unequipped. It had a small number of ships, just 2 shipyards, and very few officers. Then, to make matters worse, President Lincoln ordered a complete naval blockade of the South. The Union Navy was ordered to patrol the seaboard from North Carolina to the Rio Grande and halt the flow of materials in and out. With its flow of supplies cut and blockade runners obstructed, the Confederacy desperately needed a cheap, effective means to strike back at the enemy vessels blocking its ports. For New Orleans investors James McClintock and Baxter Watson, the solution was a vessel that could attack the enemy from underwater. By remaining submerged until the very last moment, the vessel would achieve the critical advantages of surprise and quick escape. To fund the construction of their submersible warship design, they depended upon investors. The most important of the investors was a Louisiana planter, lawyer, legislator, and submarine promoter named Horace Lawson Hunley. Hunley was a patriot and had played a leading role in submarine development. With Hunley and other investors' dollars in hand, McClintock and Watson began their work on their underwater vessel. After 2 prototypes were built and lost, they started on a third. According to William Alexander, the group's military engineer, they began with an advanced boiler-like cylinder, a 25-foot or 7-meter-long boiler. Watertight bulkheads at each end of the vessel created the ballast tanks. Through 2 tiny hatches, fore and aft, her crew squeezed into an iron sarcophagus. Supposedly, 7 of the crew lined up on the port side, tucked in behind a row of hand cranks. The hatches were mounted atop short conning towers. It has been suggested that here, at the forward hatch, stood the pilot, sighting through the glass, and within arm's reach of the bow blast controls, a mercury depth gauge, an adjusted compass, and a small ship's wheel connected to the rudder. Levers operated the 5-foot or 1.5-meter-long fins that controlled the vessel's diving or climbing. A petty officer in the stern operated the pump and the seacocks for the aft ballast tank. Diving and surfacing required careful coordination between the pilot and the man in the stern. Twice, during training runs, tragedy struck, killing 13 men in total, including the entire crew commanded by Horace Hunley himself. And thus, the man who was the driving force in Hunley's creation, and for whom she was named, lost his life at her helm. Nevertheless, the vessel's new commander, Lieutenant Gordon Dixon, had little trouble gathering a new volunteer crew. Dixon and his men trained long and hard, learning to extend Hunley's range, experimenting with longer dives, up to an agonizing 2.5 hours in duration. Dixon knew that the time was coming. Soon Hunley would make history and achieve revenge. On the evening of February 17, 1864, cold waters off Charleston were calm. Lieutenant Dixon and his crew squeezed into the Hunley for a probe of the Union blockaders' defenses. Shortly after setting off, Dixon spotted the sloop of war USS Housatonic, anchored a few miles off Charleston Bar. Immediately, Dixon set a course to investigate. A course that would require 2 hours of back-breaking labor from the Hunley's crew. With 90 pounds or 40 kilograms of explosives secured to their bow, the men propelled the iron submarine into history. It would be 136 years before their vessel returned to port. A dream made into reality by the unyielding interest in the wreck by sea hunter Clive Cussler. Over a span of 15 years, Clive headed 4 major search efforts in the hope of finding the Hunley. He began on the coastline and progressively worked his way to the sea, with a second team surveying the site of the Housatonic. Occasionally, when he himself was drawn away from the expedition, his search team would continue the hunt in his absence.
I would fax a search grid to Ralph, and then they'd go out, and then he'd call me up and say, "It's not there," so I'd fax another one. And finally, we wiped out all the area. And so then Ralph, after he finished one search grid, started looking outside the Housatonic, and that's when they found it. I wasn't home that night, so they had to wait till the morning, and because they didn't consider in their excitement, the 3-hour almost difference in time, so, I got a phone call at 5 a.m. and Ralph says, "We're not looking for the Hunley anymore." And I said, my first thought was, "Oh, are you giving up?" And he said, "No, we found it." And I was just went numb.
Once the wreck was found, a tremendous operation involving government assistance and the best in technical engineering was set in motion. Its objective? To raise the Hunley. The protection of this nationally significant artifact was given high priority by the state of South Carolina. The Hunley weighs about 30 tons, so a specially built truss had to be constructed. Large piles were lowered to the bottom, then the water and silt was pumped out, causing the piles to be sucked into the mud. The truss was then lowered, with each end supported by the piles. A series of support straps were looped below the wreck, then carefully inflated to evenly distribute the ship's weight. Once completely supported, the Hunley was hoisted aboard the recovery barge. She was then transported to a specially constructed holding tank and will be transferred to the Charleston Museum when restoration is complete.
Yeah, here it comes. Top of the truss is up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72, 73, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, 108, 109, 110, 111, 112, 113, 114, 115, 1 Look at that. Look at that just hanging there. Hooray! You know. Oh gosh, after all this time and to see it happen and with all this going on, you know, that it's there, you know, one of the great pieces of American history.
What do you think of that? I mean, we can't get a great look at it, but
no,
what are your impressions right now seeing it?
It's much smaller than we thought it was, you know, and just as you can see in looking at it out here, it doesn't look very big. We thought it would be much larger. And so many misconceptions about what we thought the sub looked like. You know, we thought we had a big square bow, and it doesn't. It actually curves. It's a very narrow bow. We thought it was like 36 feet, 4 by 5. It's 42 feet and only 3 by 4. How these guys got in there? They couldn't have been over 5'2".
After 20 years of dedicated searching by Clive and his team, the Hunley is raised for all the world to see.
I guess I'll just jump off.
A truly joyous and rare moment that Clive Cussler has been waiting for 20 years.
We will have the sub in the tank, so we will be able to do whatever we want. We can lower the water table very quickly.
The conservation efforts on the Hunley will be among the most modern in history, making use of the very best advanced technology in order to preserve the artifact. The process will act as a model for future efforts of this nature. That evening, Clive helps to slowly spread the word of the raising of a national treasure.
Well, I'm delighted you enjoyed the books. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
The ever-inquisitive public are thankful and reach out to the Hunley with their questions.
Eventually, they'll be removed. When the submarine is in the tank out there, they will probably have to cut a section out of it to get all the silt and get it at the remains. And with great ceremony, they'll be removed and taken out to Magnolia Cemetery and buried next to the first crew that died and next to Horace Hunley and his crew who died. Right. So you should have all three there together, which is remarkable, really.
The time that it took for Hunley to come back from the grave and return to Charleston stirred the hearts of many. What the people of South Carolina have planned to do is an incredible undertaking. It's a large expenditure of time and of money, and yet it's worth it. Because saving this ship not only gives us a tangible link to the past, it also provides a model, a role model, if you will, for how underwater archaeology can be practiced in the future. People need to see and interact with the past in order to appreciate it. We need icons and symbols like Hunley to inspire us. We need them to remind us that at the end of the day, these are not just abstract ideas. They are things built by people, and people who lived, people who died. By saving Hunley, we pay homage to the past, but we also give inspiration to future generations. Without the preservation, without the care, without the investment of time and dollars, Hunley once again would become nothing more than a memory.
The Housatonic was maintaining her station with lookouts posted, and officers, masters, and a gunner on deck. Just before 9 o'clock, an officer of the deck caught sight of an object about 100 yards or 91 meters off and approaching. The unknown object approached the Housatonic and jabbed its deadly torpedo into the starboard side, just forward of the mizzen mast. The strange vessel halted, then slowly backed off. It was at this point crew members had commenced blasting at the object with small arms fire. The Housatonic's propeller slowly began to move, but by then, the Hunley's reversing motion pulled the rope taut and engaged the trigger attached to the torpedo. Suddenly, the night was rent by a tremendous explosion. As seawater poured into the Housatonic's hull, she quickly settled stern first, then rolled violently over on her port side and dropped to the bottom, taking 5 of her crew with her. It was an historic victory. Hunley was the first submarine to sink an enemy battleship, a feat that would not be repeated until the First World War. The question on everyone's lips was, what had become of the Hunley? She and her gallant crew simply disappeared. Whatever mishap befell the Hunley, we can only imagine the terror of her crew's last moments, trapped in darkness in an airless iron cage, plunging to the harbor's bottom. No hope of rescue, no possibility of escape.
To bless, hallow, and consecrate this vessel, which has for many decades served as a place of repose for its crew, whose bodies we now commit to thy keeping, who art the resurrection and the life, and who livest and reignest with the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
In order to actually get to the preservation chamber where the Hunley is being worked on, you have to enter a large building, and then you literally have to walk up a long metal stairway so that you actually get up over the tank top, and then by a system of ladders go back down to where they're actually doing the conservation work. Once you're there, it's really overwhelming. The conservation effort that's being undertaken for the Hunley is really quite a remarkable effort. And the people who are working on it are absolutely sensitive to and in tune with this vessel. And I know that it relates to the fact that in this very, very small vessel, very, very brave, very dedicated men died.
You see how confined, you really get an idea how confined this submarine is, putting your head in and looking to the end of it. It's hard to imagine anybody could even fit themselves in here.
I'm just amazed that you could get 8 guys, 9 guys into this thing and actually have them be able to function.
Yeah. Obviously, this is your hand crank. We now know there are 7 positions. Since the hand crank is off center, is on the starboard side, and the bench on the port side, they obviously had to transfer the energy from the hand crank to the propeller shaft. And here you can see the gears from the gear on the hand crank, and then the gear for the propeller shaft there, which would be their mechanism for transferring that energy.
At the time that I arrived, they were still removing the human remains from the sub. The bodies were really quite distinct, although because the submarine landed nearly upright, and most of the people, in fact, it looks as if every one of the crew members really died in their position. So that although the bones were separated, they were each in discrete areas. It really looks as if the way the excavation was taking place, that they would be able to basically have discrete bodies when they were done.
Each plate had 2 viewing ports, 2 glass viewing ports.
The Hunley did have several portholes, one in each section of the vessel. They would have afforded a small amount of light when she was submerged in daylight, but in her nighttime raids, once that candle was out, these men were literally working in complete darkness. Again, just makes their accomplishment that much more remarkable.
Such a fantastic story, the way it was built, the fact that it killed 1 crew, the 2nd crew including Horace Hunley, of course, who was the designer and the sponsor of the whole project, submarine project. And then the last crew that went out and torpedoed this brand new Union sloop of war and then vanished. But it went down in history as the first submarine to ever sink a warship. So there was so much appeal in history.
It's one thing to go to a Civil War battlefield or to a historic site and see the setting where great events happened. It's another thing to actually see the tools, the uniforms, the weapons, the human artifacts that make it real and tangible and part of our experience. If opportunities exist to find something like Hunley, to carefully preserve them and make them accessible and available, then what we've done is we've captured the public's attention. And that's exciting, because not only does it help bring the past alive, it also encourages the visitor of today. When properly done, the recovery of something like Hunley is a tremendous draw. People flock to see these reminders of the past, particularly things that have come literally out of the tomb, be they the treasures of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh or a ship sealed in the mud for over a century.
The sinking of the Housatonic changed naval warfare forever. As with so many other naval innovations of this war, the Hunley led the way to new technologies, new strategies, and a new venue for the waging of war. After this sinking, the Union Navy made submarine development a much higher priority. This work would lead to the fleets of nuclear crafts that fly the stars and stripes around the world. Today, nuclear submarines are among the most sophisticated machines ever constructed by man. And yet, in a very real way, they owe their existence to the bravery of those first undersea warriors, the U21 and the H.L. Hunley. It was these early vessels that made the first kills and helped to open a new chapter in naval history, which would lead to the development of the sophisticated submarines that we know today.
Now it's your turn to get up off that couch and go into the deserts, go into the mountains, go under the rivers, the lakes, and the seas, and search for history. You'll never find a more rewarding adventure.
Join us again as we search the oceans of the world for lost and famous shipwrecks. Another true adventure with the Sea Hunters.